Okay, hi everyone. My name is James. Next slide. So my talk can be summed up in one idea, which is this. History is written by the victor. Hopefully, if things go well, by the end of the talk that will make sense, and if not, then I guess that's just some fun for you all to look at. Right, next slide, please. There we go. So hi, so my name is James. I'm a sociologist of everyday life. I'm also a counsellor in transactional analysis, and I work and live in Manchester. Next slide. Oh God. Oh Jesus. Okay, so some provisos about my talk. So I'm going to come from a slightly different angle. So I'm a sociologist, at least with a sociologist hat on now. So sociology is often about stating the obvious. So it can be about kind of finding interesting things, but often we work really hard to say something that feels very, yes, okay, that's very real. We work with broad brushes, so I'm going to be talking about the end of love, and if you've been through a breakup or a divorce and this doesn't resemble your life, that's fine. And then the final thing is that sociology is about finding social explanations for things, not sort of psychological ones. So we've worked really hard to kind of keep social life in our minds, which as someone who kind of works both with sociology and psychology can be really tricky. But hopefully, when I'm talking about things like the self and emotion, I'm going to come at it from more of a social angle. It might sound a little bit mysterious, but hopefully it will become clear as we go on with the talk. Next slide. Okay, so what does love, from a kind of social point of view, look like? Well, love offers us a bunch of things, a bunch of knowledge about ourselves. Being in a relationship when we're in love or when we're just connected or attached to people, we can work out a bunch of things about who we are, including, for example, the information we get about ourselves in our housing situation, like who we live with, what are the kind of tapestries and patterns of daily life and how love kind of binds us into those. Things about intimacy and connection and what it's like to have contact, and we get loads of information about who we are when we have kind of intimate connections with people. The conversations that we have, so if you think you're in a relationship and just think of the kind of conversations you might have on a really routine basis. Things you might eat together with a person, like the breakfasts you might have with a partner, and the ways that you might kind of share sleeping patterns, all of that kind of just basic data on who you are. So love can provide us with a really rich set of material about the sense of ourselves in everyday life. Next slide. So why might we care about the end of all of that? Why is that interesting? If not as sociologists, then at least as people who are in relationships, why it would be interesting to think about what happens when all of that ends? At the very least, it's going to be dead chaotic because we're undoing all of these kind of sources of information about who we are. So we might have to change our living situation. We might have to change the tapestries and patterns of everyday life, the intimacy and contact that we might have. So all of these things, which once provided us with information about who we are, suddenly kind of come undone. It can be hugely disruptive. Like the end of a relationship can be hugely disruptive to our sense of self. Aside from it obviously being dead painful, we lose a kind of coherence. Or we lose many of the things that might have given us coherence as well. So let's talk about divorce. So this whole talk is going to be really focused on divorce, but I think that you can take some of the lessons around divorce and apply them to any kind of ending of a relationship. May or may not be true. But let's talk about divorce for a while. God, I actually really enjoyed this. It's really satisfying. Oh, God, yeah. It's like omnipotent fantasies of control. It's great. Okay, so how do we make sense of divorce? So what I'm going to do is walk us through some of the key sociological ideas for divorce. Most of the work starts off by really trying to get a sense of what stages we might go through before divorce is initiated. And it starts with this work by a woman called Diane Vaughan, and it's a really interesting book. And she says that there are these kind of 6 steps that we go through, and it starts with a secret. So one person in the marriage, and she's talking about heterosexual relationships because it's the 1980s. Yeah, what are you going to do? Gotta love them, yeah. So one person starts off with this secret, and it's like a secret desire to leave the marriage for whatever reason. It could be all sorts. So, and she calls that person the initiator. And the initiator starts off with the secret and starts to prod the other person and says, look, I'm not happy. You've got to fix, you've got to change something. And does it all very under the ground. It's all subterfuge. And it keeps escalating. And then eventually the non-initiating partner kind of cottons on, but not in the sense that they know something is really, really terrible or really wrong with the relationship, but they get a sense that the other person is kind of keeping something. So then they start a kind of detective hunt looking for clues of what's going on. And eventually something happens. Maybe the first person reveals that they've had an affair or whatever, and the secret's out that the marriage is not working, and then the divorce kind of happens. So she loves the stage model. And in fact, like lots of people love a stage model because it's a really good way of telling the divorce story. Yeah, people like to know, okay, like what were the steps? How did it happen? Who did what? And it kind of makes an intuitive sense in that, like, if you speak to someone about a breakup, like you usually haven't, you get a picture pretty quickly into the story of it. Who pulled the trigger? Who was to blame? That's a big one, right? Who was good and who was bad? So you get a sense pretty quick of what went wrong, usually. I mean, broad brushes, okay. So this seems pretty clear until sociologists get involved, and then it's not. So one of my favorite sociologists is a guy called Dennis Hopper, and he did a big study of divorce, like a lot of people, but he did something else as well. So he, first of all, listened to people tell their divorce stories, which were all really convincing, like, oh, she's a dickhead and he's a twat, or whatever, or like, you know, oh yeah, we were really amicable, it was like really well ordered and whatever. So people told these good stories, and he was kind of interested in them. And then he got people to plot out, like, what were the actual events, like on a big timeline or whatever. And he was like, huh, isn't that funny? Things don't match up. Oh, okay. So he found that when you paid enough attention, so when you focus really closely into what people are saying, and then you match those things up with the events of the marriage, people's stories, there was a bit of a mismatch, essentially. So sometimes, like, the initiating partner, so the partner who was like, oh yeah, no, I pulled the trigger, it was me. Actually, if you look at the story, the non-initiating partner had checked out like years ago. And there was actually a kind of very little correspondence between the story and the reality, between the kind of positions, identities, and the roles that people took, and then what actually went on. And it gets worse, guys. So Reisman in the 90s found that actually when people are telling these divorce stories, they start to solidify gender, so gender roles. One of the things she found was that when men and women start to talk about divorce, they often start describing, well, my husband was a really bad husband, or I was a really bad wife, or I was a bad husband and she was a good wife, or whatever. So Reisman's kind of suggesting that we start to use these divorce stories to settle some of the, to settle our identity, to figure out who we are. This divorce story helps us decide something. It helps us kind of work out, okay, who was good, who was bad, who was a failure, who fucked up. Oh yeah, it was his fault, it was all his fault. Who was a bad person, who deserves support and care. Really, really important when you're telling a divorce story, right? Oh man. It was all terrible for me, and it was fine for the other person. Yeah. And this is the thing that it's such an interesting insight. When I read it, I was like, fuck, that's so interesting. So Sclater, again, looked at divorce stories, and she found that so this is just, again, for heterosexual couples. So when there's difficulty and difference in a heterosexual couple, like when they start to pull apart, the way they describe that difference is in terms of gender. So the more further apart they get, the more gendered the other person is. So what does that look like? It's like you've got a couple, they're pretty close together, pretty kind of fused or whatever. They start to separate a bit, and then the wife is like, man, that guy, he's really uncommunicative, like all men. Yeah, or the woman is like, oh, yeah, she's really naggy, like all women are very naggy. So this gender story becomes really, really strong as the distance grows in the couple. brief aside for same-sex couples, we don't have access to the same gendered scripts for difference. So we go to mental health instead. I'm not kidding, it's actually what we do. He's a narcissist, she had a psychotic break. My anxiety meant I had to leave. I don't know quite where the accent's coming from, but that's what I'm channeling. Or it wasn't my fault, and it was the mental health system that was the reason we got separated. But we don't. So gays, queers don't have access to the gender system. We go to mental health, which I thought was a kind of fun little aside. What does it mean for us? Okay, so I'm winding down. Yeah. So when love ends, we kind of come apart. We lose a sense of who we are. But we want to talk about it, even if we only talk about it to ourselves. There's some kind of social imperative to tell a story. So this is where the sociological part comes in. To tell a story that makes sense, with a start, a middle, and an end, with someone who initiated, with a winner and a loser, someone who gets the blame, someone who gets the sympathy. This accounting process, so you call it a process of accounting, seems to be how we put ourselves back together after this thing breaks up. How we reform a sense of ourselves in the new world. We start to talk about assigning, working on gender, blame, victims, who's good and who's bad, which is all the stuff, the self. This is what the self is kind of made up of, all of these ideas. Okay, here's the last slide. If we stretch these ideas a bit, divorce stories seem to suggest we're actually quite used to taking these kind of off-the-shelf scripts to make sense of stuff. So when we go through some kind of chaos, it doesn't even have to be a divorce, it can be anything that's unsettling. We'll just go off the shelf and we'll try and make sense of it in the form of a story. So here's my contention, and it is a bit of a stretch, I'll give you that. Who we are might also be written after the fact, not in the battle, not in the chaos or the craziness of everyday life, but through the accounting that we do about it afterwards. So it's the story we tell in reverse, if that makes sense. There you go. Thanks.